I think we'll get started. That's okay. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this, our first Lunch and Learn. For those of you who don't know me, am Laurie Beyronavand. I'm the director of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems. I also teach here at Vermont Law and Graduate School, and I'm really excited to welcome Liz Turner. Just to give you all, Liz is now a visiting professor at Vermont Law and Graduate School, but Liz started with us as a fellow. And I have known Liz since Liz was a student at Harvard Law School, and had the honor of getting to travel with her, not as one of my students, but Professor Scott brought a bunch of students from Harvard down to DC, and we got to go lobby together in a super awkward way. But yes, we were educating. Right, right. Sorry. I take it back. Strike that from the record. Um, but when Liz first started with us as a fellow, we like very quickly got a request from the USDA to do some work on urban ag. And Liz really took that on as a fellow, and made that project her own with a lot of help and support and leadership from our deputy director, Lilani Nelson. So the two of them really led this amazing project, and we thought that it would be exciting for you all to hear a little bit about this, get a sense of what it looks like to work in the center, and also what it's like to be a fellow in the center, and to really take on a project and go full steam ahead with it. So with that, I will hand it over to Liz.
It's a good start. Oh God, can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me online all right? I mean, I'm okay with it where it is if you can hear me okay. Hi, thanks Laurie for that nice introduction. You now know that my name is Liz Turner and I'm a visiting assistant professor at CAFS here at VLGS. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about our work generally, a little bit about my background and how I came to be here, and then a sort of overview of the work I've been doing over the last 2.5 years, basically as a fellow and now as a visiting professor. I'm also going to invite a couple of our great students to come up towards the end to talk about their experience working on some of these projects, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So if you have questions either in person or online, please hang on to them and we will get to you. We have plenty of time to talk about them at the end. I also realized that this is like our CAFS slide template, and I realized that this is the least urban ag possible image that I could have selected, but they are nice looking, those cows. So just a quick overview of CAFS for those of you in the audience who might not be familiar. CAFS is the center here on campus that handles sort of law and policy related to the food system. We have staff that work on research topics on all kinds of food system issues, including aquaculture, farm to school and institutional food procurement, seed IP, farm worker protection, and other food system worker issues, and many, many more topics. We involve students in that work through the Food and Agriculture Clinic, which Professor Scott leads, as students in our food and ag classes, as student research assistants, and through other independent research opportunities. If you have questions about any of that, feel free to reach out to me or any of us, and we'd be happy to chat more. A little about me. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background about how I got to VLGS and to sort of legal academia, such as it is, or such as my role in it is anyway. As Laurie mentioned, am a fairly recent law school graduate. I graduated from law school in 2023. But my first job in food systems was working as a line cook in a restaurant in Brattleboro, Vermont, where I grew up, called Top of the Hill Grill. Not sure if any of you ever stopped there off exit 3 on the way south when I was 18. I graduated from a liberal arts college in 2008 with a degree in comparative literature and cinema studies. So obviously I was well prepared to work in the food system. I spent the next 12 years or so trying my hand at various food systems jobs. So I worked on a garlic farm. I picked many, many, many thousands of garlic scapes. I worked as a barista, as a coffee roaster, in restaurant kitchens, at farmers markets, as a delivery driver. And then I spent a few years before law school working in marketing for a coffee company based in Portland, Oregon. So I got to do fun things like set up ice luges for cold brew at food festivals. Um, Lilani had some questions about including this image, but it's pretty representative of what my job there was like. Um, while I was working at all these jobs, I started to really develop an interest in the kind of rules and regulations that govern the food system. So questions about things like how farmers are able to access or use their land, what kind of wage and employment protections are offered to restaurant and farm workers, and what kinds of safety regulations govern how food is sold. This interest eventually prompted me to apply to law school. And as Lori said, I ended up going to Harvard Law School, where I spent all 3 years working to some degree with the Food Law and Policy Clinic, including with Professor Scott, who was my clinical supervisor there. In my second and third year of law school, I worked on a clinic project that essentially prefigured the work that I'm doing now. There's a picture of me with our community partner there. So FLPC partnered with Loiter, which is a community organization based in East Cleveland, Ohio, that was trying to figure out ways to make money based on a circular food-based business model. So they were trying to figure out how they could grow, process, sell, and sort of recycle food all within East Cleveland and the talent and land base that they had within that city. In that clinic, I worked with a supervisor and a clinic partner to help these folks understand the local laws and regulations that applied to those business ideas, and sort of which of those businesses they could start right away, which would require policy change, which would require additional permitting or other kind of processes. We were also able to go to East Cleveland and meet with the community members working on this project. I'm proud to say that I was actually able to go back last year for a different conference and visit some of the folks who were involved in that project and see sort of what it's grown into. They're up and running. They took over an old Taco Bell and have like a community food hub kind of operating out of it, and some other really cool projects that we helped them develop, which I'm very proud of. Ismail, who's in the middle there, was also one of our first advisors on the project that I'm about to talk about. So that was a sort of a full circle moment for me. When I was applying for jobs right out of law school, I was really hoping that I would eventually be able to move back to Vermont, where I'm from, and work on local food law and policy issues with a specific interest in state and local policy. Luckily, CAFS happened to be hiring for basically a person to do exactly that. So I feel very lucky to have landed here. Yeah, so the research I'm about to talk about both led to the publication of the resources, that some of which are scattered about on the tables, and also to the development of an urban ag class, which Elijah is going to talk about. So during the last couple of years, as Laurie mentioned, my work has primarily consisted of co-leading a project on local policies that impact urban agriculture. I'm going to talk about that more in a bit. Get into the weeds of it. I've also updated our existing resource on zoning for urban agriculture and worked on some shorter term projects with sort of local and regional partners related to farmland access, zoning, land use, including projects related to on-farm housing, community farmland access, and creative land access agreements for things like foraging or seasonal harvesting. Through the urban agriculture research in particular, it's really given me the opportunity to dig into an area of work that I'm very grown more and more sort of passionate about, develop a national network of professional connections, collaborators, mentors, and connections for the students here, and introduce more than a dozen students to this area of work by contributing to various elements of this project. It's also helped me to develop a longer term research agenda and to publish a suite of resources on this topic that we've gotten really good feedback about from folks out in the field. So that's been really gratifying. Water break. So this is the sort of broad research question that's governed this project, the OUAIP funded project. So much of food law and policy, or the food law and policy literature, focuses on sort of federal or state laws and policies. And so this was an opportunity to really dig into what local governments are doing. Um, and in urban agriculture in particular is an area where local government has sort of an outsized impact on what folks are able to do in that space. So it's been a very rich research topic. The main output of this project so far has been the sort of 101 guide is what we call it, the urban ag and local policy. I don't even remember what the full title is. The Lonnie can hold it up. Um, which collects it's also available online for those who may be watching virtually. Which collects the main themes and findings from our research. So this project was funded by the USDA's Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, which was established in the 2018 Farm Bill. There's actually a line in the Farm Bill that tells the new Office of Urban Ag that they need to develop resources on local policy, and so they outsourced that obligation to us through a cooperative agreement. Our research for this guide focused on the 17 cities that the USDA identified initially as urban hubs, which are the cities where they placed what they called urban service centers, so FSA and NRCS offices that serve urban farmers specifically. This was sort of a artificial constraint that we put on our research, but it ended up being a really useful one because these cities offer a really wide range of geographical diversity, size, resource concerns, sort of how developed the policy environment of urban ag was in each of these places. And the output, this sort of guide, is meant to serve as a resource for folks who are working in city government, who are advocates or farmers who are looking to make policy change in their local governments as examples and explainers of the ways that policy impacts their work and what might be possible in terms of policy change, or what some sort of promising strategies are for changing policies in order to improve the fortunes of urban farmers in cities. So essentially, all of the research for this project was done in collaboration with students. We conducted a policy scan of each of the 17 cities to see what the sort of rules on the books were, and organized and tagged all those policies so that we could compare them across cities. We carried out follow-up interviews with stakeholders in each of the cities. In each city, we tried to talk to a farmer, someone in city government, someone in kind of a service provider role. In several of the cities, we were able to talk to the USDA employees who work with farmers in those cities. And those interviews really gave us a sense of what was going on the ground, how the policies that were on the books were being implemented, and what kind of nuances and additional concerns we should be aware of that we weren't able to capture just by doing desk research. And also another sort of key element of these interviews was that we could get a sense of a sort of moment in time politically of like how urban ag was being treated by these cities, whether there were policies in development we should keep an eye on, whether the sort of political fortunes of urban ag were waxing or waning in these cities, and which was really instrumental and important for our research. We also work closely with an advisory group who've been consulting with us on this work quarterly since the beginning of the project. And those are food systems and urban ag professionals from around the country who have more hands-on experience with this work, and have given input into the sort of shape of our research, the shape of these resources, notes on accessibility, tone, things like that, have been really important and integral to this process as well. So we published this big guide. We've published some fact sheets, which there are copies of around also. We're in the process of publishing a series of case studies on what individual cities have done in particular policy areas. We've also got some best practices sheets coming down the pipeline, which will dig into specific policy tools and what, specific policy language examples might be best, or at least promising in terms of regulating urban agriculture. I've become a little allergic to the term best practices over the course of this work. But offer some, in a lot of these conversations, we talk to folks who just don't know what they're able to do in terms of affecting policy change in their cities. So these resources are meant to help them say, oh, if we want our zoning code to be different, or if we want our vacant land access policy to be different, here's some examples of how that works in another city. Um, Over the course of that research, we came up with this sort of list of buckets, essentially, that we sorted the policies into. So these were the main issue areas where that came up over and over again in our research and conversation that really shape the policy landscape for urban farmers in these cities. I'm going to talk about sort of each one of them a little bit as we go through here. So land access is the number one issue for all kinds of farmers, rural as well as urban, but urban farmers have particular land access concerns, including how expensive land is in cities as being kind of the number one. Another being finding suitable land in cities to grow food on. Land in cities is often contaminated by past uses, or at the very least, the soils are compacted or otherwise altered by human intervention. In order to access land through cities, cities often own land. There are a lot of restrictions on how that land can be sold or disposed of or leased. So we've been looking at those policies as well. This particular area has led to a continuing research project that Crystal is going to talk about in a little bit on land banking, which is one particular strategy that cities can use to make use of vacant land within their borders. Zoning and land use is another huge issue for urban farmers. So these are the rules and regulations that govern how land is used. This is another big issue in cities, largely because city zoning codes were designed without agriculture in mind at all. At the sort of time that most zoning codes were developed, agriculture was something that was happening exclusively outside of cities, or that was the idea. So a lot of the cities who have been trying to encourage urban agriculture have had to kind of undo those zoning codes or find other strategies, to kind of loosen regulations on agricultural land uses, while balancing community concerns about noise, smell, pests, bee stings, other kind of issues that might arise when a farm or garden moves in next to you in an urban environment. These are a couple examples of kind of special topics in zoning and land use. These came up a lot. So accessory structures are structures like greenhouses, sheds, farm stands that are small or temporary, or may otherwise just kind of be not fully contemplated within a city's zoning code, but which are really important for farmers and gardeners for various reasons, including the ability to extend seasons or sell their goods or store their tools. So this is often a very common issue that farmers and gardeners face, is that they're issued, tickets or forced to take structures down, even that they realize suddenly do not comply with zoning codes. Another big issue is code enforcement, which is often separate from the sort of people who write the zoning laws, or the officials who go around the city and issue fines or tickets, or even orders to remove structures that don't comply with zoning codes, or uses that don't comply with zoning codes. So this can be a really big hassle for farmers, or a really big interrupter for farmers. And often the issue is just that the code enforcement folks aren't very educated about what a farm is, what it looks like, what cover cropping looks like. And so there's a lot of, it creates a lot of sort of like conflict and unnecessary, yeah, I keep coming back to the word hassle, but if a farmer's issued a $200 ticket for weed overgrowth or whatever, that's not only $200 that they can't, it's out of their pocket, but they also, if they want to contest it, it's weeks or months of dealing with city bureaucracy. Our next big topic is city governance and public funding. So this is how cities organize themselves to support urban agriculture. This might look like hiring an urban agriculture director or other dedicated urban agriculture staff. It might look like raising money for urban agriculture programs through special tax programs or bonds. We took a look at a few of the ways that that cities have created positions or special offices for urban agriculture and what kind of impacts those offices are able to have. This has also led to an exciting collaboration with a national group called the Urban Ag Directors Alliance, which is a group of city officials all across the country who work on urban agriculture issues. And we were just a part of their first annual convening in Austin, Texas. And Elijah and Crystal were able to join us. So they'll be talking a little bit more about that in a little bit. Another significant issue for urban farmers is water access. Obviously, plants and animals need water to grow, but people who are growing food in cities have to navigate municipal utility processes to access that water. They can't, like rural farmers, just dig an irrigation ditch or drill a well. And those water connections can be really expensive. Water rates aren't designed for urban farmers. And it can otherwise just really inhibit the ability of urban farmers to grow food. So this it's also a little complicated because often water is administered through a separate utility district, which is a separate unit of government than the city. So there's an additional layer of complexity to navigating utility processes. Ooh, we've got some new friends joining us. Welcome. So there are some special policy considerations there. This is one of the things that we heard over and over again from farmers, that working with water utilities or with within the sort of like processes that are necessary to access water in cities is really challenging, really difficult. And there are a few sort of key strategies to make that easier, which include treating urban farms and gardens as green infrastructure, essentially, recognizing the ecosystem benefits of having permeable land in cities that diverts water away from storm sewers, for example. So Philadelphia offers a credit to people who run community gardens that takes money off their water bill for offering that service to the city. Next, we have soil health and composting. As I mentioned earlier, soil can be a big concern for urban growers due to contamination issues, compaction issues, and also due to restrictions on soil building practices like cover cropping and composting. So we took a look at all of those different kinds of policies, looking specifically at sort of on-farm composting rather than municipal, like big municipal, like composting at the dump kind of composting. We found that, many cities, there's a lot of concern about things like rats, pests, other harms, smell, other nuisances that, piling food scraps in a particular lot might bring. But there are, a lot of cities who have implemented strategies to ensure that composting can happen safely and without, too much burden on neighbors. Which really helps contribute to soil fertility in urban environments. There's also a lot of state and federal funding available to clean up brownfields, which are sites that were used in the past for industrial or commercial uses that have some amount of contamination on them. And so a few cities have leveraged that funding to open up land for urban farming and gardening. And our last bucket was innovative production, which is right in the name of the office that funded this project. It's also a real catch-all for farming techniques that aren't open air, soil-based kind of traditional farming. So rooftops, any kind of farming indoors, which includes like greenhouses, aquaponics, hydroponics, aquaculture in cities in some places, vertical farming, anything from kind of super low tech, just, kind of normal growing plants, but on a rooftop, to super high tech, everything is controlled by an app of some kind. So we sort of collected all the policies relevant to innovative production into one bucket. A lot of the same issues that come up in other types of farming are relevant here. Things like zoning concerns, water access. But there are some special considerations around utility rates for electricity, in particular for controlled environment agriculture and other more high-tech innovative production uses, as well as the potential to use there's a lot of sort of startup capital required for some of these techniques. So some states and local governments have issued tax incentive programs or other kind of financial incentives to lower those burdens. All right. So that's the end of me talking through that report. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions at the end. But for now, I'm going to invite Crystal and Elijah to come up and talk about their work. This is all of us in Austin a few weeks ago. And Crystal and Elijah are circled, so you can find them. Who wants to go first? Or you can come up together.
Um, Hi, my name is Elijah Zwick. I'm a 2L JD with a heavy career interest in food and ag law and policy. This semester, I've been taking law and policy of urban agriculture with Professor Liz Turner. It's a small class, but having gotten to the end of the semester, frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way at this point. It's really just been a pleasure to be able to engage in a dialogue in a setting that you don't get in a large class, and structured in such a way that really encourages that. I haven't been in a law school class yet where you can talk about like sociological theory and then switch over to zoning and municipal regulations. So it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, really just an informative class. I have a little bit of like an urban agriculture background. Back in like 2018, 2019, was a little bit more involved in the space in New York, and have since grown a little disillusioned, not in small part due to the setting where I live now, being a little bit different, and the space having changed since COVID. So I was really interested coming into the class to see what we would cover. And yeah, as I mentioned, it's fun to go from T-bone Bordeaux to municipal regulations and have it really inform the class in that way. Also covering just a lot of social justice topics as well in the class, which is kind of naturally intertwined with urban agriculture. But yeah, so a couple months ago, Liz mentioned that we had this Urban Agriculture Directors Alliance convening happening in Austin, Texas. And of course, jumped on as an aside through CAFS. There's a lot of opportunities to travel and go to these sorts of conferences. I've had the opportunity to go to Phoenix for the AALA conference and Harvard for the Food Law Student Leadership Summit. Maybe got that acronym right. Which I think is a unique position to be in law school, just as a result of not only CAFS, which is fantastic here, but also CAFS and their national reputation, and just kind of the space that we occupy in what is somewhat still a burgeoning field, which is food and ag law and policy, and a lot of legislators, politicians waking up to the fact that you kind of do need lawyers working on this stuff. So as a law student, I feel really lucky to be able to benefit from that. Anyways, back to UADA. I guess informed in part by the fact that I have been to some other conferences, it's kind of it might be a little too easy to gush about how much of like somewhat an emotional transcendent experience the UADA conference was, because you have all these municipal employees who I learned are really siloed in their respective offices, and they don't get a ton of opportunity to speak to not only individuals doing the same work in other cities, but also just like-minded folks within their own offices. So the isolation is very real. Anywho, there's about 30, 40 different people from across the country. And then Crystal, I, Lalani, and Liz as the law school contingency, kind of representing the policy and research component. So that was just, yeah, for a lot of reasons, a really unique experience. And I learned a ton about municipal government from people who, they're not as involved in the academic, like part of this whole sphere of policy. And seeing, they're doing the real work, and how much we can help them out through our own academic ventures. Um, Otherwise, yeah, it's fun to be down in Austin. It's a cool city. And is there anything else I should touch on? Yeah. Crystal, my classmate. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal Kino, the second yellow circle right there. I'm a 2L and I'm a student clinician with CAFS, which is a great clinic if anybody wants to apply. It's also very small. There's only 4 of us, but you get a lot of useful knowledge as a person that needs to eat to survive and live on this earth. Just beyond your legal education, it's so important to know like actionable steps to take and to learn how to buy groceries and what's going on with what they're farming that you eat. I work with Liz directly with the Urban Ag Project. I'm looking up land banks and researching how land banks can possibly help urban ag. Since the land access is such a huge issue with how people can farm, uh, land banks could potentially offer that access to land to different municipalities that do involve themselves with land banks. And then I also will talk about the UADA. Again, as someone that's interested in urban ag or food and policy, it is such a new field, as Elijah mentioned. So I was really able to benefit learning how these people got into the positions they are, the potentials of, besides just being a lawyer, potential for urban ag work once I'm out of school, and a lot of great networking. Even within seminar, we get a lot of great guest speakers that talk about, again, how to take actionable steps, how to write an op-ed, how to just work and be in this field. And yeah, you guys should apply to CAFS.
All right, thanks, guys. If anyone has any questions about either our research, CAFS, what the student experience is like, feel free. Now is your time. Yeah. Hi, Sarah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to restate for those online who maybe can't hear. So that was a question about there's a proud tradition in urban agriculture of more informal farming and gardening efforts that are largely kind of communities just taking it upon themselves to use marginal or unused land to grow food, largely for personal use or community use. It's a really important part of and sort of how that fits into the research. That's a really important part of the research and of the kind of like current landscape of urban agriculture in the US, I would say. More in some cities than in others. There's a sort of tradition of guerrilla gardening, as you say, of really taking over lots that appear to be abandoned and putting them to use for growing food. We actually published a case study on adverse possession in Philadelphia as a tool for land access. There are quite a few gardens in that city that have been farming the same land for years and years and years. And Pennsylvania has like a really long statute of limitations for adverse possession claims. So they successfully lobbied to reduce that statute of limitations for gardens and farms, in particular in urban settings. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it's the sort of I'm realizing that I should have foregrounded urban agriculture a little better at the beginning, but the scope of the project included everything from community gardens and more sort of informal neighborhood-based projects through for-profit commercial farms. Like I went to Detroit for a conference focused on urban ag, and got to see some operations there because of the amount of vacant land in Detroit that are multi-acre farms within city limits that are growing food at the same sort of like rate and scale as many of the small farms around here are. Whereas in other cities, the spaces that farmers are using are much more marginal, or just focus more on sort of personal or community use. I mean, one of the things that I'm interested in learning more about, the context of those kind of like community and allotment style gardens in Europe in particular are really different. They're really much more sort of baked into the fabric of communities in a way that they aren't in most communities here. So that's the thing I'm interested in learning more about as we continue this research. Yeah, Rich, I'm realizing we have another microphone. Can we?
Rich Levitt, I'm in the development office. The question I have is, which city of those that you scanned do you feel is, or you've judged is like the standard setter? Like, which one do you think we should be looking at as the model for, at least in America, you just mentioned Europe, is, the place where urban agriculture is taking root in a way that's really kind of the future for this field?
Totally. I mean, I think the short answer is none of them. I think one of the things that we took away from this project is just how different each of the cities is, and how much local context matters. I think it's easy to say something like Detroit, which is a city where there's this incredibly robust tradition of urban agriculture, and especially sort of community organizing around urban agriculture, that has led to this really well-developed, not necessarily recognized by the city government, but really well-developed urban agriculture ecosystem that's largely based on community organizing, particularly among Black farmers in Detroit. I think so that's like one example of a way that like urban agriculture has really flourished in a city that has largely been ignored by the city government. I mean, the first sort of modern urban farms were founded in Detroit in the early 2000s. Detroit just hired an urban agriculture director a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's really taken a long time of community organizing and community work to get the city to be kind of on board with urban agriculture as a desirable land use in that city. There are cities like Philadelphia and Chicago that are creating really innovative programs around urban agriculture, but they're really new and they're just getting started. And so it's like hard to know how well they're going to sort of, as they mature, how successful they'll be. But they're very promising and exciting. And you hear the people who are running those programs talk about them. It's like very inspiring. So, it's still, as Elijah said, it's still like a really new field. And especially like cities there have been waves of interest in urban agriculture from the municipal level going back to the late 19th century. But the most recent one was kind of a COVID, George Floyd era wave of interest. And so those policy initiatives are really starting to kind of take off now as really, having sort of proof of concept and an ability to showcase like what's possible in the space. So it's a great time to be keeping an eye on things. Yeah, back in the corner. Rich, can you hand the mic back there?
For your presentation. As you look at some of the constraints against people entering this area, how is distribution a barrier for them, setting up distribution? And also, what percentage of these urban agricultural entities profit versus nonprofit?
To answer the second part of your question first, I would say it's hard to say, but I would say nonprofit agriculture is much more dominant in this space than for-profit agriculture is, largely because of the first part of your question, which is that it's really hard to scale up these operations to a degree where they can be truly profitable. So even in cities like Detroit, where people are able to, I went and visited a farm that is growing on, I think, 7 acres, for example, and those folks are able to farm full time and that's their job. But in a lot of other cities, they're growing part-time. It's one of 6 jobs that they have. They're really doing it. Even if they are selling those vegetables, they're doing it out of personal passion, essentially. And there's lots of reasons for that, which include just the land that's available. You think of a city like New York, for example, it's really hard to get access to any kind of, ability to grow at scale. But it's also, a matter of, okay, like how do we enter into markets that are going to be profitable for us? Direct sales are often really difficult due to in part zoning regulations. Accessing like wholesale opportunities might also be challenging because of either the amount that you're able to grow or like food safety regulations, produce safety regulations that govern whether or not you're able to sell through those venues or to institutional procurers. So there's lots of interesting work being done in that space. But there's some folks like there's a program in Detroit that's run through the public market in Detroit that is focused on like aggregation and helping farmers scale up to wholesale. And we talked to someone in Baltimore at the UADA convening who's working on a farm stop model in Baltimore, which is kind of like a consignment store for farmers, where they're able to drop off sort of what they're growing or what they're harvesting at that time. That might be promising for smaller scale farmers, but that's an area where there's a lot of experimentation. Yeah, you can grab the mic.
Can you say a little bit more about any patterns you saw with like racial, socioeconomic, and maybe cultural patterns within the urban farming setting?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think, one answer to that is that there's a way to look at the modern urban agriculture movement as a response to the urban renewal movement of the 1980s and early 1990s, which is that largely neighborhoods with predominantly people of color, were cleared out, buildings were destroyed, resources were diverted elsewhere, and folks in those neighborhoods kind of took it upon themselves to start growing food for their own communities, especially when grocery stores started moving out. So, there's a really rich tradition there of Black communities in particular, but immigrant communities also really like banding together to grow culturally specific foods, healthy foods, and helping to kind of just really develop the kind of like food infrastructure in their neighborhoods. There's also, I would point you in the direction of the Philadelphia Urban Ag Plan, which draws a really clear connection between like the history of redlining in that city and where urban farms are located and how gentrification is happening. There's sort of a virtuous or vicious cycle, depending on your perspective, of urban farms being developed in these, lower income neighborhoods. Those urban farms creating a sort of halo of like nice neighborhood around a particular block or section of that neighborhood, and that neighborhood getting targeted for gentrification. So a lot of those gardens are under threat, like development pressure now, because all of a sudden there's a lot of interest in property development in those neighborhoods. But yeah, I think depending on who you talk to, like racial and social justice is either kind of like the most important thing about urban agriculture, or at the other end of the spectrum, there are folks who are just like, isn't it cool that we can grow lettuce in a shipping container? And like, and that's what their focus is. So, there's sort of something for everyone in the space, I would say. Yeah. Yeah, Joe, do you mind grabbing the mic?
So as urban agriculture falls like more as almost a tool of policy making with these folks in city government, what are what is the capacity to grow food and in urban agriculture systems, and like what exactly, when you spoke with these people, like what did they say the problems they want to address are? I mean, I realize there's probably tons of different ones across cities. So is there any that really stood out to you or common ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think that food security is an important piece of the sort of policy justification puzzle. Like I just saw an estimate that, Detroit could be growing 70% of the produce it consumes, like within the city, if it activated X percentage of its land base to grow food. Or, there's lots of statistics like that. I have a hard time imagining that kind of expansion of urban agriculture will take place kind of realistically. But there are a lot of other, there are a lot of ways that urban farms can just be a piece of the food access puzzle in these neighborhoods, right? Which are like, yeah, there's a farm stand, the same way it is here. Like you go to a farm stand in, Royalton or Barnard or whatever, but you're also going to Shaw's to get like most of your, normal groceries. So there's a way that urban farms can serve that same purpose in urban neighborhoods. I also think that, I also know and have heard that there are lots of sort of additional, more sort of social or community benefits to urban agriculture, including, there's studies that show that there's an increased perception of safety on blocks where there's an urban farm or a community garden. Urban farms provide like heat sinks in cities where there's a heat island problem. There's, air purifying benefits of just having more plants around. There's lots and lots of sort of additional sort of softer benefits to urban agriculture that make it very worth having as part of an urban fabric, I would say, in addition to just the kind of like growing and providing food piece of it. And the other thing I would say is on the sort of like food side, talking to folks who like grow food in neighborhoods, particularly in lower income neighborhoods, like the opportunity to have people in those neighborhoods just see food growing is really important. Like they might not be getting the freshest food at school or at home or whatever, so they can see, where a potato comes from, where lettuce comes from. It's a really important like educational tool in that way too for community members who are just learning more about kind of, fresh food. Any more questions? Yeah, Laurie.
In addition to the land banking research, could you talk a little bit about future research that you think will be a part of this project?
Yeah.
I already know the answer.
What's that? One of the things we're working on right now is we're collaborating with the Urban Ag Directors Alliance on a study of sort of municipal governments and how they're supporting urban agriculture, and what the benefits are of offering these programs and what supports are needed to offer these programs through cities. We're also working on the land banking research. There's a long list of policy topics that I'm like totally blanking on now. Lonnie, do you have any that are top of mind?
Research that Liz was just talking about expands beyond the 17 cities that we studied for this research project, because everything she talked about was based on the research that we focused on those 17 cities identified by the USDA. And so the work that we're doing with UADA expands beyond that to include cities that the Urban Ag Directors Alliance has representation from and beyond. So it's also just like building out more of what we've been looking at.
Yeah, and we're also, thank you for that 20 seconds. We're also looking at local food retail as one of our next step research projects. So looking at things like strategies like municipal grocery stores, which have gotten, a lot of press recently because of the New York project, but also like farm stops, like I mentioned earlier, they're trying to experiment with in Baltimore, other kind of opportunities to bring more sort of fresh food infrastructure into urban environments. And another kind of, my like special interest is really property and land use law. So I'm really interested in things like co-developments of agriculture and housing projects. That's often a tension in development conversations in cities where we can't have a community garden because we need to put affordable housing there. But why not both? So looking at examples in places like Madison, Wisconsin, Crystal and I just talked to someone in Columbus who works at a land bank there who just co-developed a affordable housing and community garden project, but looking for ways to really like integrate those uses to, instead of, pitting them against each other in terms of like serving communities.
I have two questions. One, maybe this was in your presentation, sorry, but what are like the biggest barriers to entry? And then two, once established, where are most of these operations selling or providing food to the community?
Great question. we talked about a little bit about those things, but not directly necessarily. So in terms of primary barriers, cost of land is a huge one. And then just general kind of everything's a little bit more expensive in cities. Water's more expensive, like building processes are more complicated. You're working largely within like residential or commercial zoning, not agricultural zoning, where farms in most places that have agricultural zoning are basically allowed to do whatever they want. In cities, they really have to navigate complex like permitting processes to put up a greenhouse, for example, in most situations. And just like the money to get things off the ground. I mean, I think you talk to folks who work in the space, they say like land and money essentially are like their two biggest needs. And then once they're selling, I mean, community gardens is a huge part of of the space, and most of those vegetables are going for personal use. They're like, it's the same as having a backyard garden, but down the street. In other situations, there's a really diverse range of market access opportunities, I would say. You see urban agriculture or like urban farms that sell exclusively to high-end restaurants. You see urban farms that are exclusively donating to food banks. You see farms that are, just operating a CSA like a small farm would here. So there's a really broad range. I mean, I think the one thing that you don't see a lot of, like any kind of animal-based operation, is pretty challenging in an urban environment. There are a few exceptions to like Albuquerque and Phoenix both have a lot of like huge amounts of open space that have been annexed into the city technically, but are still like ranch land fundamentally. So you see some exceptions to that rule, but in most places, it's just going to be kind of specialty produce, herbs, those kind of things. So the market opportunities are pretty restricted to wherever you can sell those things. Yeah, Avery.
Having the community garden or like the urban agriculture as an opportunity for education, has there been any more formal like farm to school programs that are utilizing that urban agriculture? Sorry, I missed that earlier.
Yeah, totally. There's actually, in a lot of these cities, there are like high school ag programs. Like Chicago has one, Philly has one. Philly has like a school farm that has like horses and dairy cows and stuff in northwestern Philly. New York has a public high school, like a magnet high school, that has like a hydroponics program. So there are those kind of like almost like workforce training, like high school level programs. And then there's also the kind of like edible schoolyard, school garden model, which is really common across the country, I would say, of having some kind of garden space attached to a, usually like an elementary or middle school where they do kind of gardening education stuff. Mart? It's all right. It's very confusing.
Okay. Curious. I just thought about the Intervale, in Burlington, and I'm curious, like,
technically,
that's like not really in the city.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's
not really a city.
Well, I know. I am aware. We're on the same page there. But regardless, I'm curious if there are other, whether it's real cities or whatever, like other cities that have something like that, that's like kind of on the outskirts and like accessible, like larger farm. Because I think, I mean, my understanding is a lot of urban agriculture like isn't going to be on that scale. Like, I don't know how many acres they have, but
hundreds.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Like, I've been there, but I don't, can't tell how big it is. Yeah. Like, yeah, that's a lot of space, and it's, I mean, it's a community, it's available, right? I mean, within whatever parameters.
Yeah. Yeah. There are, I mean, Burlington and sort of smaller, more rural cities, I think, are unique in terms of their proximity to that scale of agriculture. But there are examples, like Portland, Oregon has a really strict urban growth boundary, which means that farms are just much closer to the city. And there's like an incubator farm just outside city limits in a town called Corbett, I think it's technically in, but it's like a close-in suburb of Portland that's similar to the Intervale, like a big piece of land that's shared with shared infrastructure that is used mostly as an incubator farm. So farmers can start there and scale their operations up and then move off onto their own land. In Albuquerque, there's this whole big area of the city called the South Valley that is largely still agricultural. So that, you know, we talked to someone at the UADA convening who's in the process of, you know, developing a, you know, big multi-acre farm project there. So depending on the context, there's stuff like that. But, you know, in cities like especially sort of denser East Coast cities, or even, you know, a city like Oakland, for example, where there's been a huge amount of development in the last few years. And there aren't very many restrictions on how that development happens. The agriculture gets the larger scale agriculture largely gets pushed further and further out of the city. I think we're about at time, but I'll hang around if anyone has any additional questions, or questions for these guys. You don't need to hang around for that long, but that's my email.